strengthening my belief in the Christian concept of God. However, as I branched outside of Christian thought, I started to see holes and discrepancies. I started to really struggle with the basic concepts of that faith, which seemed to contradict one another. Eventually, I reached a point where I felt that I couldn't honestly believe that Jesus was God anymore. This was obviously going to be a problem if I wanted to be a Christian. So I resolved to give up my faith because it was not based in truth. This was about 4 years ago. Afterwards, I entered a period of spiritual blindness. During the next few years, I pursued worldly wisdom. In my darkest hour, I rejected all awareness and knowledge of God. However, I also realized the futility of worldly wisdom because it changes from moment to moment and has very little power to unify people. I became very dissatisfied with my life because I had no awareness of God and no hope in the wisdom of mankind, which only seems to lead to self-destruction. So I rejected the path of man's wisdom. Truth is not truth if it can fade away so easily with changing cultures, customs, governments, etc. I reflected. It occurred to me that if God was real, then there must be something absolutely true about him. What could it be? For months I was troubled by this question. Then in a flash it came to me, there is no God except God. Humans can't create or destroy God, we can only find ways to turn from him. And awareness of God is the most basic truth about God, and it full of every potential. I pursued this awareness of God with an eagerness that I had not experienced for years. I didn't know what it would lead to, but I knew it was absolute truth. I had to try and understand this awareness better, and over the next few months, I had established the following. There was one God, who is eternal and absolute, who created all things, but is not a created thing, nor is he like any created thing. He makes himself known to us, and he alone is worthy of worship. And I had never even read the Quran at this point. I had to double check. I had written this down. I went back and checked, and true enough, this is what I had written. I had arrived at this knowledge by striving for the truth. This confirms that creation testifies to the reality of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At this point I knew that if the path of man's wisdom leads to his destruction, then the path of righteousness must lead to his salvation. I could not believe that the creator of the universe would leave his creation in a state of spiritual blindness, so God must reveal this path to us. All of my previous research into religion has frustrated me, and led me to believe that we couldn't really know this path of righteousness. In April of last year, I began to pour out all of my frustrations about not knowing where this path was. After stating plainly everything that I felt was wrong with mankind, I concluded with these thoughts. Maybe there is wisdom in religion. Maybe there is purpose to restraint and modesty. Maybe there is power in submission, not power over others, but power to find peace and hope in your life. To submit your will to the will of God is to seek to restore the natural order that our world and ourselves crave. But I was baffled at this point because the best way I could think to learn about God was by collecting bits and pieces from ancient books of Scripture. This is a difficult task because one has to decide what's true and what's been invented by man along the way. At this time, an old acquaintance of mine had seen the struggle I was going through, and because I was posting my thoughts on the internet, he told me about the Quran. He gave me a copy to read, and he spoke to me about Islam. I was rather startled, to be frank. I mean, there seemed to be so much about what I believed and wanted in Islam, but I had not expected to find this in any one particular religion. Again, I reflected. Then I delayed. Then I became negligent and began to struggle again. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was guiding me. One day I was driving down 109th Street, and I was struck by the thought, Ryan, why are you continuing to struggle? Surrender and find peace. And this time I knew the words meant. I knew that I was driving near this mosque, so I turned and drove into the parking lot here. This was in the morning, midweek, so I didn't even know if there'd be anyone to talk to, but again, Allah, the most gracious, was guiding me. There was one car in the parking lot and one man wearing a smile, who met me with a handshake, and when I asked him something along the lines of, so can you tell me about Islam? He spent the next 2.5 hours listening to me and telling me about it. He encouraged me by telling me that I was very close to being Muslim, and he told me about the blessings upon blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestowed upon those who draw near to him. I really couldn't ignore what seemed so clear to me now. I was a Muslim. My old acquaintance I mentioned earlier stayed in touch with me, inviting me to meet with him and some of his Islamic brothers to discuss further. I had so many questions. We spent hours talking. Time and time again, I would tell them something that I had learned from the old books. And they would respond with hadith or an ayat from the Quran saying essentially the same thing. Here is the truth. This is pure and sweet. My struggle is over. My peace of surrender is Islam. I was full of joy like I hadn't known since I first began my search for God in earnest over 6 years previous. The path of righteousness has been revealed to us through the Quran and through the life of Muhammad, the field of the Prophet. That afternoon, July 14th of this year, I made my shahada. And brothers, if I pronounce this poorly, please speak up. Ashhadu Allah ilaha illallahu wahadu la sharika lahu wa ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluhu.
Allahu Akbar.
Since then, I've been learning my deen and experiencing the peace that comes through following the Surat al-Mustaqim. Alhamdulillah. When I began my spiritual journey, I took another name for myself when I posted my writings on the internet. I figured out recently it translates most closely to Abdul Hadi. Just for you who are curious, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has been guiding me all along. One who surrenders himself to be guided by the one true God with no partners will find Islam. I believe that. Everyone who comes to Islam has their own path, whether they're raised and grow within it or they revert to it. My path began with Tawheed, and everything stems from that. But just as important has been what I've experienced outside of my individual awareness of the one true God, in the ummah that has been cultivated to Islam. The brotherhood and sisterhood of the Muslims is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to the earth, just as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed in Surah Al-Imran. If the Quran had been changed, if the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alayhi wa sallam had been abandoned, if there wasn't an obvious difference between what a Muslim desired and what the world desired, I would not be a Muslim. And if many brothers hadn't encouraged and guided me, I would have struggled for a lot longer to come to appreciate the beauty of this religion that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has perfected for us. Subhanallah. May blessings and peace be on the messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. May praise and glory be given to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, our creator and sustainer.
Allahu Akbar.